I'll explain how I made this setup for the IS200. There were a couple new techniques I wanted to try out that I had just recently discovered. First, there was the use of progressive springs as bump stops, and the bump stops itself as the mainspring. Second, I had used this one on the i310 LP, tilting the vehicle's mass body forwards so that the rear end of the car has a higher center of gravity. This is done by setting a value for the graphics pitch rotation. This time I used -3. The reasoning is that the rear of the car has glass higher up than anything in the front of the car, which is quite heavy. I had also noticed driving the i310 on Yamanashi. It liked to rotate when trail braking in a particular way, so I used that on the IS. I had already previously raised the center of gravity of this car. The graphics offset in the Y dimension is now -55. I also decided to push the center of gravity a bit forward to 55%. I had done that on the Volvo 850 and liked it. I don't think it's bad to exaggerate some features a little bit. I would like the car to have a higher resonant frequency in the rear compared to the front. That means, when you bounce the end of the car, how often does it go up, down, up in a second? It's what's called flat ride. So I started by trying to get the car to settle onto its new progressive bump stops, previously known as springs. Once it looked like the bump stops were engaging and the car wouldn't sink to the ground, I assigned a reasonable spring rate to the bump stop value and set the packers to engage at full droop. The suspension travel, or sag you could call it, is around 100 millimeters. It's hard to say exactly where the bump stops start engaging, and now I mean the progressive springs that are pretending to be microcellular foam bump stops. For any roll bar values, I'm using 10K front, 3K rear. In the front, the spring rate itself comes from 15K spring rate and 35K bump stop. The progressive rate is 62K. In the rear, the real-life spring rate is higher, but the bump stop softer. In Assetto Casa terms, spring rate plus bump stop for 10K, 36K, total of 46K. With total mass of 1280 and 45 rear weight percentage, the ride frequency comes out to be 2.01 Hz. The front's total spring rate of 47K gives it a frequency of 1.8 Hz, 9% higher frequency in the rear. The progressive rates are 62K front and 54K rear, so 15% higher in the front. And it makes sense too. The front end has higher forces because it loads up under braking, so it needs a firmer stop. It also helps to keep the car stable and not oversteer, counteract the higher rear spring rate. Damper rates are about a sixth of the spring rates, 6, 8, 8, 12, both front and rear. Front geometry is nothing special. I've eliminated most bump steer and put the tow arm on the front side. I like to err on the side of bump out to make the steering stable. Gas stir and KPI around 6 degrees. Perfect Ackerman geometry. In the rear, however, I did something clever. I made the steering arm the lower control arm. That arrangement most accurately represents the original Lexus geometry, and it seemed to work out really well. I've come to love how that rear end handles. It's got excellent grip, but is still nimble. It is hard to pinpoint why it is so. It has low anti-squat, low roll center, maybe a bit higher roll center than squat geometry. It tows out from bushing deflection, but is countered by toe-in from bump steer. It jacks up from braking force, which gives it good stability when braking. But there is a moment when releasing the brakes, when the rear end unloads, it sort of drops. In that moment the front end comparatively has more load, more grip. It sets the car for rotation into the corner, nothing the rear end can't handle mid-corner. You can use that to advantage with a driving style. In any case, it's easy to rotate the car. I guess you could conceptualize the rear end as semi-trailing arm with toe and camber control. I've made some changes to the size and shape of the inertia box. The box is now shaped more like a shoebox. Maybe 5% lower, but 20% wider and longer. I feel like it represents how actual vehicles feel like the closest. I just love this car. You don't need 400 horsepower to have fun on a track. There's fulfillment in honing your driving style in a low-power car. Brake balance is set at 70%. I was inspired to work on this chassis after being reminded that Morizo, or Akio Toyota, former head of Toyota, raced an Altaza when he started racing. This car has been at some point regarded as the second coming of Hachiroku 86. I can see where that comes from. Great handling, unassuming looking low-powered FR sedan. I've heard the JDM IS200 is better throttle response. It's something the European model is lacking in. I guess they were going for the same target market as BMW. They do tend to keep the best stuff to their domestic market. The engine is struggling in this uphill, but soon the downhill starts. So with these spring rates, the rear being 9% stiffer, when the bump stops aren't engaging, at cruising state without high G-forces, the car achieves flat ride. When the car goes over a bump, or any disturbance in the road surface, the rear has to catch up to the front, in terms of reaction speed, if they should both finish rebounding at the same moment. That's because the front has a head start. It's ahead of the rear. When the car starts to really corner, the front has a much stronger anti-roll bar up front, and the stiffer bump stops. Without flat ride, the car goes into a back and forth oscillation that you have to counteract with stiffer dampers. It's not something that was done on the factory IS, so this can be considered a sport-modified suspension. Here marks the beginning of the downhill.